Have you ever witnessed someone completely misjudge a situation, only to have it backfire in the most unexpected way? Today's story takes us to a bustling restaurant, where a rude customer walks in with an air of entitlement, ready to make everyone's day a little worse. The target of their wrath? A polite and hard-working waiter who seems to bear the brunt of their frustration. The customer scoffs at the service, mocks the menu, and even throws a few personal insults. Other diners watch uncomfortably, but the waiter remains calm, handling the situation with grace and professionalism. What the customer doesn't realize, though, is that the man they're belittling isn't just any waiter, he's the owner of the restaurant. As the tension builds and the insults escalate, the stage is set for a jaw-dropping twist that will leave everyone speechless. How will the owner respond? Will the rude customer finally get a taste of their own medicine? Stick around, because this is a story you won't want to miss. The restaurant was buzzing with activity that evening, a mix of clinking cutlery, soft laughter, and the hum of conversation filling the air. Amid the lively atmosphere, a customer walked in, their presence immediately commanding attention, not because of charm, but because of an unmistakable air of arrogance. Dressed sharply and carrying an air of superiority, they scanned the room with a critical eye before settling into a table near the center of the dining area. A waiter approached with a warm smile, the kind that came naturally after years of working in hospitality. "Good evening. Welcome to our restaurant. Can I get you started with something to drink?" they asked politely. The customer barely glanced up. "Water. No ice. And make it quick," they said curtly, waving the waiter away as if dismissing an unimportant servant. The waiter nodded, unfazed by the tone, and returned shortly with a glass of water. As they placed it on the table, the customer sighed loudly, inspecting the glass as if searching for imperfections. "Is this what you call clean? Do you even know how to do your job?" Other diners began to notice the exchange, their conversations faltering as they watched the scene unfold. The waiter, maintaining their calm demeanor, apologized sincerely and offered to bring a fresh glass. "Forget it," the customer snapped, setting the glass aside. "Just bring me the menu. And let's hope the food is better than the service." The waiter handed over the menu with a polite nod and stepped away, but the tension lingered in the air. At a nearby table, a couple exchanged uneasy glances. A family seated by the window whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of disbelief and discomfort. As the customer browsed the menu, their criticisms grew louder. "What kind of restaurant charges this much for a steak? Do you people think this is fine dining?" they muttered, ensuring their voice carried far enough for others to hear. When the waiter returned to take the order, the insults continued. "I hope the chef back there knows what they're doing, because I don't want to waste my time or money on subpar food," the customer sneered. The waiter, still composed, jotted down the order and assured the customer that their meal would be prepared with care. But as they walked back to the kitchen, a flicker of something unspoken crossed their face. Behind the scenes, the staff had taken notice of the customer's behavior. "How do you stay so calm?" one of the younger servers asked the waiter, who simply smiled. "It's all part of the job," they replied, though their tone hinted at a deeper understanding. The customer's behavior didn't stop at the waiter. They began to complain loudly about the decor, the noise level, and even the other patrons. "This place is a joke," they muttered, clearly intending for their words to be overheard. Meanwhile, the other diners grew increasingly uncomfortable. Some whispered amongst themselves, debating whether to step in or stay silent. Others avoided eye contact altogether, unwilling to get involved. When the food finally arrived, the customer wasted no time finding faults. "This is it," they exclaimed, inspecting the plate as if it were an insult to their standards. "I could make better food at home blindfolded?" The waiter listened patiently as the customer launched into a tirade about the meal, offering to make adjustments or replace the dish. But the customer wasn't interested in solutions. They wanted to assert their dominance, to make it clear that they were above everyone else in the room. Unbeknownst to the customer, the restaurant owner had been watching the entire interaction from a discreet corner of the room. Dressed casually and blending in with the crowd, they observed everything: the insults, the waiter's composure, and the growing unease among the other diners. The owner's expression was unreadable, but their eyes carried a quiet intensity. It was clear they were weighing their options, deciding how best to handle the situation. As the evening progressed, the customers' behavior only worsened. They demanded to speak to the manager, insisting that the service was unacceptable and that they deserved compensation for their terrible experience. When the waiter calmly explained that the manager was unavailable, the customer scoffed. "Figures. This whole place is run by amateurs," they said loudly, their voice dripping with disdain. The tension in the room reached its peak as the other diners watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The waiter, still maintaining their professionalism, assured the customer that their concerns would be addressed. But the customer wasn't satisfied. "You know what? Forget it. I'll take my complaints online. Maybe that'll teach you all a lesson," they said, pulling out their phone and snapping photos of the restaurant. As the customer continued their tirade, the owner finally stood up. Their steps were measured, their expression calm but firm. The diners who had been silently rooting for the waiter held their breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The customer, too, caught up in their own indignation, didn't notice the owner approaching until they were standing right at the table. "Excuse me," the owner said, their voice steady but commanding. The customer looked up, their annoyance evident. "And who are you supposed to be?" they asked, their tone dripping with sarcasm. The owner's response was simple but powerful. "I'm the owner of this restaurant." A stunned silence fell over the room as the weight of those words sank in. The customer's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. But the confrontation was far from over, and the room buzzed with anticipation as everyone waited to see how the owner would handle the situation. Would they call the customer out? Or would they take the high road just as the waiter had done? The story was far from its conclusion, and the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was on edge, knowing that the next few moments would define the night and perhaps even the restaurant's reputation. The owner's words hung in the air, and for a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The customer blinked, their expression shifting from smug to confused. It was clear they hadn't expected this turn of events. "Wait, what? What?" The customer stammered, looking up at the owner with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "You're the owner? I thought you were just another waiter." The sarcasm in their voice was palpable, but now there was a hint of uncertainty, like they weren't sure whether to backpedal or double down. The owner stood tall, their gaze unwavering. "Yes, I'm the owner. And I've been watching you interact with my staff all evening," they said, their voice calm but firm. The words were measured, each one carrying weight, and they didn't need to raise their voice to command attention. "You've been rude, disrespectful, and frankly, you've made everyone around you uncomfortable." The room was silent. The other diners, who'd been watching the exchange with growing tension, now leaned in, eager to see how this would unfold. The waiter, standing nearby, felt a wave of relief wash over them. For the first time that evening, they allowed themselves a small, almost imperceptible smile. They had been waiting for this moment, knowing that the owner wouldn't let the situation slide. The customer, still processing the revelation, scoffed. "So what? You're going to kick me out now? That's your big move." They were trying to regain control of the conversation, but the cracks in their demeanor were starting to show. The owner shook their head, their expression softening just slightly. "No, I'm not going to kick you out. But I am going to ask you to consider the way you've treated people tonight. You came in here with an attitude, expecting to belittle others to make yourself feel superior. And frankly, it's been exhausting to watch." The customer's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. They opened their mouth to respond, but the owner raised a hand, signaling for them to stop. "I don't need an apology," the owner continued, their voice steady. "What I need is for you to understand that respect is a two-way street. You can't demand excellence from others if you can't offer the same in return." For a moment, the customer seemed speechless. Their usual arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a vulnerable, almost defeated look. The weight of the owner's words was starting to sink in, and the realization that they had crossed a line was beginning to dawn on them. I didn't mean to, the customer started, but the owner interrupted, their tone softer now. I know you didn't come in here with the intention of ruining anyone's day. But that's exactly what you've done. The thing is, we all have bad days. We all make mistakes. But it's how we treat others in those moments that matters most. The customer, clearly taken aback, fell silent. The room remained still, the air thick with the tension of the confrontation. The other diners exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others watching with bated breath, wondering how this would all play out. The owner's gaze softened even more, their voice gentle but firm. I'm not asking you to change overnight, but I am asking you to take a step back and think about how your words and actions affect the people around you. We're all just doing our best. The customer, now visibly uncomfortable, shifted in their seat. They opened their mouth, then closed it again, as if searching for the right words. For the first time that evening, their posture slumped and the harshness in their voice was gone. I didn't realize. I'm sorry. I've been a jerk. The apology was hesitant, but it was real. The owner nodded, accepting the apology with grace. I appreciate that, they said simply. Now, why don't you enjoy your meal in peace? And maybe, just maybe, we can all leave here with a little more respect for one another. The customer, still looking somewhat sheepish, nodded. They didn't have much to say after that, but they seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. As the owner turned to walk away, the room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension lifting like a weight being removed from everyone's shoulders. The waiter, who'd been standing by the kitchen door, watched the scene unfold with a sense of relief. They had been on edge all evening, but now they felt a sense of vindication. The customer had been put in their place, and the owner had handled the situation with grace and dignity. It wasn't just about the customer being reprimanded, it was about the respect that everyone in the restaurant, from the staff to the diners, deserved. As evening continued, the atmosphere in the restaurant slowly returned to normal. The customer, now quieter and more subdued, ate their meal in relative silence, occasionally glancing up at the waiter but saying little. The other diners, who had been watching with bated breath, resumed their conversations, though the energy in the room had shifted. There was a sense of camaraderie now, a shared understanding that respect had been restored. The owner returned to their seat in the back of the room, blending in once more with the other patrons. They didn't need to say anything more. Their actions had spoken louder than words ever could. As the night drew to a close, the customer paid their bill, leaving a tip that was generous, perhaps more so than they normally would have. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture, a small token of acknowledgement for the lesson they had learned. When they stood to leave, they didn't say anything more to the staff, but there was a subtle shift in their demeanor. They weren't the same person who had walked in earlier, full of arrogance and entitlement. Something had changed. The waiter, still in the midst of clearing tables, caught their eye as they made their way to the door. For a moment, the two shared a look, one of mutual understanding, unspoken but clear. The waiter nodded and the customer, without saying a word, nodded back before stepping out into the night. The restaurant slowly emptied, the final diners finishing their meals and leaving. The staff began to clean up, but there was a lightness in the air now, a sense of relief that lingered long after the last plate had been cleared. The evening had been difficult, but it had ended with a sense of resolution. As the owner stood to make their rounds, checking in with the staff, they paused for a moment, looking around at the empty tables. They smiled to themselves, knowing that they had handled the situation with the right balance of firmness and empathy. It wasn't just about running a restaurant. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt valued, where respect was the foundation of everything they did. The waiter, who had been working alongside the owner for years, walked over to them as the final customers left. "You handled that well," they said quietly. The owner nodded, their smile warm but thoughtful. Sometimes it's not about the confrontation itself, it's about how you handle it, and how you make people feel afterward. The waiter nodded in agreement. Yeah. I think we all learned something tonight." As the night came to a close, The restaurant stood empty, the lights dimming as the staff prepared to leave. But the lessons of the evening lingered in the air, a reminder that respect, kindness, and understanding were the true ingredients that made a place special. And while the rude customer had left, the story of their encounter would stay with everyone in that restaurant for a long time to come. The owner's quiet reflection on the night's events echoed in the hearts of the staff, a subtle but powerful reminder that sometimes the most meaningful changes come from the most unexpected moments. And as the doors closed behind them, they knew one thing for certain: the next day would be a new beginning for everyone.